Welcome into the Big Little Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig. Week 3 of college football is in the books, and week 2 of the NFL is almost in the books at the time of us recording this. Chargers and Raiders are still playing right now, but the Bucs just got a big win over the Houston Texans. Comeback win, late game winning drive by Baker Mayfield. That's 2 times in the last 2 weeks, Andrew. Did you have any initial thoughts about that before we go into anything further?
No, none at all. I think Baker Mayfield is one of the best quarterbacks we have in this league, and I'm happy for the Buccaneers' success.
Phenomenal podcasting. He has 0 thoughts on that sporting event.
No thoughts.
I'm
Good
just
team.
playing. All right. We'll get to the winners and losers later on in this episode, but the first thing that we're going to start with is Notre Dame being ranked after going 0-2 to start the season. First time in the AP poll since 1988 that a team has been ranked 0-2. That was Michigan that year. I think this leads to a broader question about the AP poll and the validity. Obviously, it doesn't mean as much as it used to with college football playoff rankings coming after week 8. But definitely wanted to pose that question. Do you have a problem with Notre Dame being ranked 0-2? And do you have a problem with the AP poll in general right now?
Yeah, so I definitely think that you can go either way on this topic, right? I feel like a lot of the people who want to see Notre Dame not ranked are very passionate about the fact that they shouldn't have been ranked. I personally think that if you left them unranked, I wouldn't be upset. If you left them ranked, I wouldn't be upset either. They started as a top 10 team, specifically the number 6 team in the nation going into the preseason poll, and I thought that was it was a generous spot given the fact that they had a new starting quarterback, but still they were a national championship game qualified. They made it to the national championship game last year, and they're just an overall good team. They lost to Miami by 3 points off a game-winning field goal at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, and then they played a tough Texas A&M team, which is now ranked in the top 10. Those are the only 2 games that they've played this season. I could see how you'd want them to drop out of the top 10, top 25. They're the only team that have ever gone 0-2 to start and then still be in the top 25. But based off where they started in the rankings and the teams that they lost to, it's 2 teams that currently stand in the top 10, and they lost them off a game-winning field goal and a game-winning touchdown. So it doesn't drive me angry seeing them in the top 25, and I think that they'll probably just win out anyway and remain firmly in the top 25 after this game.
Yeah, I think anything that happens in a certain sense, if this happens and you're 0-2 and you get ranked, it's because of some extremes. I probably could have said that better, but you get what I'm trying to say. The late game stuff against 2 top 10 teams, I think, is definitely worth mentioning. It's a nuanced kind of look at why this has happened, and it definitely is in part because of their preseason ranking being so high. If you had told me that they were unranked, I would have been fine with it. If you told me that they're ranked as they are, number 24, I think that that's fine. I think it's unfortunate that a team like USF drops out of the rankings after their first loss, after getting 2 ranked wins. But Florida lost as well. And, how good is Boise State? There are some intricacies here. I know that the online opinion is definitely that they should not be ranked. And I get it. But, it's week 3, and there are a lot of teams that have only played an FCS team and 2 lower level group of 5 teams. So it's also tough to compare some resumes whenever you look at that. And I do think that there is something to be said about quality losses. If they were outside of the top 25, they would have made their way back in by week, 6 or something like that, or however long. And probably way earlier than that, if we're just being completely honest. Probably would have been 1-2 or 2-2. They probably would have made it in. I have a major problem with a lot of other aspects of the AP poll. It's less about what Notre Dame just got ranked and more about some of the errors that have occurred over the last few weeks that have honestly opened my eyes to how ridiculous this polling system, or just who is making the votes, is. And I talked about this with you a little bit before, but there was obviously that big thing that happened last week with an AP voter putting USF behind Florida after USF just upset Florida. That happened again now by 3 voters this past week, and there are 66 total voters, so less than last year, I believe, which was 250. There are less voters, so it does potentially impact some of these teams and where they are ranked. There was a voter now that did not honor the Vanderbilt, South Carolina win, and she said basically it was because she was on the West Coast. She was working 25 out of 32 hours of the weekend, noticed her mistake 15 minutes after she did it, panicked, was like, this is going to be bad. It obviously didn't really matter because Vanderbilt's ranked, South Carolina's not, but she got called out. It is what it is. She made a mistake. can't really have it, but that was her reasoning. There was another voter, he owned up to it just completely. He did the same thing, but he also made the mistake of ranking another team that beat somebody else, and that was Georgia Tech, and or not ranking a team that beat somebody, and that was Georgia Tech and Clemson. He had Clemson ranked, Georgia Tech outside of his top 25. So that didn't make any sense, but it still didn't impact it. You just can't have this. There was another one as well where they ranked Arizona State, didn't rank Mississippi State, also didn't honor the head-to-head between Florida State and Alabama, which just doesn't make any sense right now. And then that voter also had Notre Dame at 10. I've been going on a long rant here in my answer, but if there are too many people to count in the AP every single week that are making this isn't even subjective. You know what I mean? Like, I get if you don't want to punish South Carolina because of the Lenora Sellers injury, but like, this isn't like, who do you have number one? Or like, oh, you have Penn State number one, or you have Miami number one, or LSU number one. This isn't like some subjective thing where you're trying to you have your own way of thinking about this. These are like tangible outcomes that you're ignoring. And I don't think that this is good. I think it kills the credibility of the AP. And there's definitely something to be said about it may not matter when it's all said and done because we're going to find a champion, but these ranked wins are counted as the season goes on. The college football playoff counts these as ranked wins when they look at what teams have done when they go have their meetings in week 8. Like, that's a big thing. And this also helps the perspective it adds to the perspective of certain teams. This is it's not good at all. And I was going to bring up, I'm sorry, I'm going to let you talk and give your thing in a minute. I'm so sorry. This is the longest rant I've had, but there was another guy affiliated with the Pac-12 who had Ohio State at 5. And I've said, it doesn't matter who you have at 1 or 2, but Ohio State at 5, Florida State at 3. We need to have a conversation here. I like that is pretty ridiculous. And obviously Oregon and Penn State at 6 and 7. So that didn't make any sense. Yeah, that didn't make any sense to me. Pac-12 affiliation, is he hating on the Big Ten? I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much, but I was like, dude, way too many weird rankings to count.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized it pretty well. I think that part of it going into these rankings is not like for like the grand scheme of things, right? You mentioned it, like we're going to find a champion, but like also to your point that the college football playoff committee does look at these ranked wins, and it is important that when there is at least a head-to-head that you honor that. Like the fact that Georgia Tech could be ranked anywhere under Clemson at this point with 2 losses and Georgia Tech being an undefeated team doesn't make any sense to me. I don't care if they're like the AP poll rankings aren't supposed to be about like technically who's the better team, like fleshing that out specifically. It's about like if you get a win, even if you were the underdog, no matter like what the circumstances are, depend with limits to it, right? Like this isn't like a Georgia Tech team that was 0-2 coming into this game and was like a crazy underdog or whatever. Like this is a Georgia Tech team that was receiving votes the week before. It came into this game at home as just only a slight underdog, and then took it to Clemson and beat them in like a really good game. So I don't really understand how you could have those teams flipped. And then same thing with South Carolina, maybe a little bit different because obviously we talked about the Lenora Sellers injury, and I get the concept of honoring that, but like at the same time, no. Like how long is Lenora Sellers going to be out for? And Vanderbilt won like by a convincing matter. So like there is no point in saying, oh, we're going to honor the fact that, especially if you're going to leave them that high up. Like number 10 in the country is absurd for South Carolina after losing to Vanderbilt. I think that at the very least, the mistakes can't come in at a head-to-head fashion. You can have your opinions on where some people are going to be ranked, but like you have to honor the head-to-heads in college football, especially when it's not that drastic, especially when the teams that are being like disrespected in this case are going to be undefeated.
And she admitted that she just simply thought that South Carolina won, but the other individual really didn't. It just said, that's on me. That's probably not good enough, to be honest. And I don't think that there's a misconception within the college football community about who the AP voters are, but just in general, these aren't just news reporters who like don't cover college football and they get a vote. Like they're beat reporters, so they should know what they're doing, but also in the same breath, they are covering maybe one specific team or a conference, and they're not national. So they do kind of have to catch up a little bit, and they're so focused on one specific team. Definitely, in my opinion, just is a tough it's a tough thing for them to do. But if they can't rise to the occasion and actually fill out their ballot correctly, then I think we need another poll. And I think it has to be national, and it's got to be some of the bigger voices in college football. I think I would love the commentators to have a voice. There's a lot of different people that you can look to in sports media that have really good college football opinions that I think would be better if they made up a poll of all of those individuals instead. But I think I got everything off my chest when it comes to the AP poll. I think it's time. I think it's time, man. Just another poll. Just another poll is best. But let's move into Miami. They just got a convincing win over a then-ranked number 18 USF squad, and their path to the ACC Conference Championship game just got a lot more clear with Clemson's loss to Georgia Tech. How are we feeling about this USF win, and then the impact of Clemson's loss, or the win over USF, and then the impact of the Clemson loss?
Yeah, I mean, both are pretty significant for the Miami Hurricanes, and from a broader perspective, possibly the Florida State Seminoles as well, and just anybody looking to contend in the ACC conference. I think that for Miami, this kind of outlines a clear path where if you get through FSU at FSU, you look at Louisville, Stanford, SMU, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh. None of those teams really make you give you any pause or any room for concern. Obviously it's any given Saturday. I'm not saying that Miami is going to just run through all of these teams, but when you look at Miami and you look at some of these other teams, you start to think Miami has stars on both sides of the football. They're playing really good football, and they have 2 ranked wins at the time going into whatever matchup they'll be going into. I just think that this Miami team looks really good, and I don't want to get too bullish on them. I am a Miami Hurricanes fan, but all signs point up because of the fact that we did get a new defensive coordinator over the offseason. The defense does look much improved. And I still want to see a little bit more from this Miami team. I'm saying all this, but as a Miami Hurricanes fan, we beat USF 50 to 15, I think, last year, 49 to 12 this year. Defenses can look it can be a mirage if you beat up on bad teams, but the offense at the very least looks really good. Obviously, Josiah Schrader hasn't even been in for the Miami Hurricanes in the first 3 weeks of the season, and he's one of the best receivers, or at least the best returning receiver. CJ Daniels got an injury, but I'm hoping that he can be back at some point during the course of the season and some point soon. But he was a really good receiver. Malachi Toney should be one of the best receivers maybe to ever come out of Miami. He looks really good as a true freshman. Yeah, I know. I'm really high on Malachi Toney. But then Carson Beck is the Heisman favorite at this point, and rightfully so. He's looked very convincing through his first 2 games, and I'm just excited as my Hurricane fan. So you can take it over from here. But I think that the path for an ACC at least title game appearance looks pretty clear at this point.
Yeah, it looks good. I mean, obviously Clemson's first loss came out of conference, and they have South Carolina down the line, which could give them another loss, but we're just counting conference wins and losses here. So they still have a shot. They're not out of it, by any means necessary, but we're just going to have to take a look at some of the other teams within the conference. SMU got that loss to Baylor, so that was out of conference. So it's clear, but it might not always be like that. So we'll have to wait and see. Carson Beck played well. He had 2 interceptions, which you're keeping an eye on. Hey, what was going on there? Are we getting the Georgia Carson Beck here? But he looked good. The offense looked good. The wide receivers, as you mentioned, have answered the call. They lost their top 6 pass catchers last year. Every broadcast will mention that as the season goes on because they are playing really well. Running back by committee, working very well as well. I hear you about wanting to see a little bit more, though. The defense looks great, but they're going to continue to get tested. Just answer the call. Just keep answering the call. I think it feels like fool's gold or too good to be true whenever it comes to the Miami defense. It doesn't seem to be like that, but you just have to wait and see. Imagine this defense with Cam Ward last year would have been a great thing to see. I think the USF win is pretty interesting on its own because it wasn't a trap game, if that makes sense. If they had lost to Florida, they obviously wouldn't have been ranked. And I think they still would have been on Miami's radar, depending on how that game would have been. I know this is a big if and going off on fantasy land here, but Miami was coming into this game hearing the noise about USF. People saying if they win this game, they're going to be number 1 in the country. And they're a good football team, but that could have been a trap game. It wasn't because they won. Miami came into it knowing who they were playing and they took it to them. I thought they looked really good. They didn't get caught in a trap game that could have been if USF would have lost. We're looking at these Florida games here coming up for Miami. They should be able to take care of business, I think, against Florida. Here, college game day coming in. Florida State looks a lot tougher than it did preseason-wise, and that is something to watch for sure, and I don't want to discredit them at all. I think this Miami team seriously has a good case to be the number 2 team in the country as we've seen through the first 3 weeks. So if they were maybe somewhere around number 12 and we didn't know exactly what their ceiling was and they didn't have one of their wins that they do have, one of their ranked wins, I would say maybe I would be more worried about the Florida State game. Less so now because I think Miami is just that good, even with Florida State being good. So as long as Miami takes care of SMU down the road, this, dare I say, could be an undefeated regular season. I think it's already looking towards that. I know a lot of people might think Miami homers here, but I'm not a Miami fan. But
Yeah,
they look good.
Yeah, they do look good, and we'll see how the season plays out because it's at some point in 2017 we were 10-0, and then we walk into Pittsburgh, they ruin our perfect season, and then you go and you lose against Clemson in the ACC Championship game, get absolutely destroyed, and then lose the Orange Bowl in Miami. So a depressing end of that season, and you never know. Literally, a team can fall apart at the very end. So I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, and it sounds like we already did that like a little bit already, but it looks favorable. And then from the Clemson point of view, they do have Florida State at home, and then some of the other games don't look as hard. Obviously, the ACC isn't like one of those super tough conferences, but if they slip up at all in the ACC after this game, there's not much room for error. I think both ACC teams that play in the championship game will have only one conference loss, and they have to play at home against Florida State, and then they have no room for error if that ends up being true. So and if they don't win the ACC at this point, they're not going to get into the college football playoff because I just don't think that they're going to be both Florida State and South Carolina, and they already have that loss to Georgia Tech. So
all right, well, let's move into NFL Week 2 winners and losers. Andrew, should we mention the honorable mentions first?
I think we can mention the honorable mentions at the end.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, then let's officially move into the Week 2 NFL winners and losers. Andrew, who do you have as your winners?
Yeah, so as my winners, I have the Browns and the Colts. The Browns for maybe less obvious reasons than the Colts, but I think the Browns getting destroyed by almost each and every team that they play. Obviously, they didn't get destroyed in Week 1, but it's probably a positive thing because you're not looking to Joe Flacco as a guy who is going to even get you competitive in this division. He's probably the bridge quarterback, and the bridge is possibly to these 2 backup quarterbacks behind him, at least one of the 2, hopefully. For Cleveland Browns fans. And I don't think you want to see Joe Flacco as a Browns fan any longer than you have to. He's probably as good as you think Joe Flacco is at this point. He's not a starting quarterback in the NFL. And the worse he performs, the quicker you see the likes of Shadur Sanders or
Dylan Gabriel?
Dylan Gabriel. Almost called him Bo Nix, Oregon. So yeah, I think that you want to see either of those 2 quarterbacks as quickly as you'd like, and then at that point, if neither of them work out, the quicker you see them, the better, because then you can kind of decide as a franchise where you're going from here, and if you have the number 1 overall draft pick, what you want to do with that. So I think the worse the Browns look, the better, and then obviously the Colts. I thought they were a little bit fluky after Week 1 because it was the Dolphins. The Dolphins are one of the worst teams in the NFL, coming from a Dolphins fan. So and hopefully that can turn around, but the Colts look genuinely good. Their offense is hasn't punted since the season started. Daniel Jones, it looks like there's been a revival, and that stat is a little bit overvalued because they also haven't turned the ball over, but they have had a turnover on downs. So take that as you will. But the Colts do look really good. They look like they're the best team in the AFC South right now, and it's interesting because the fact that what's happening with the Texans right now, their offense looks super stagnant. CJ Stroud looks like his sophomore slump is turning into a junior slump, and what will we see from him going forward? And then the rest of those teams in that division, it feels like the Colts are the best one out of those teams right now. So you look at the division, you see a world where the Colts are possibly winning that division, making the playoffs. Not rather easily, but there's definitely a path for it at this point. So you like what you see out of the Colts, and then from the Browns' perspective, the worse Joe Flacco does, probably better for that organization at this point.
Yeah, the Colts escaped against the Broncos there. I guess they got that late call and they were able to win that game. I see where you're coming from. They're top of the AFC, or excuse me, of their division in the AFC. And yeah, those other teams have questions. So I get where you're coming from there. The Browns thing, I guess there is always a positive in the slew of negatives that they end up having. I feel bad for their defense. Their defense is still really good. It's just their offense implodes as the game goes on, and the defense just can't handle it. They're in a weird position because I guess if you draft two quarterbacks in the same draft, you want to see them even earlier than you would just with one QB. So, like I said, we're going to see, like I said before the season, we're going to see both those guys at some point play. I think we're going to see Shadur Sanders start for a handful of games this year. I have winners, 49ers and the Buffalo Bills. 49ers because I think personally, I underestimated exactly what they were going to be able to do in week 2. Losing George Kittle, losing Brock Purdy, Mac Jones going out there throwing 3 touchdowns. I get it's against the Saints, but the Saints look very competent right now. I know they're 0-2, but I think they look pretty decent. And they were able to keep the game close. So shout out to the Saints. But I like that. I think there's a little bit of, hey, can Mac Jones actually keep this team afloat? Can you put in or plug and play and put in a backup QB and still have some success if you're the 49ers? Haven't really seen that as much. I know there's a lot of Brock Purdy's got a lot of help around him, but in the last 6-7 years, we haven't really seen a backup QB for the 49ers come in and keep them afloat. So I think that that's a really good sign. And the Bills, you're 2-0, and if you look at the other 2-0 teams in the AFC, I think they're pretty clearly the ones that at least look legit. We just talked about the Colts, but the Bills look like they're serious. They got that big win over the Ravens in week 1. And then they just dominated the Jets as they normally would. But their schedule the rest of the way is also super easy. And I think that that is something to point out. They could end up going 7-0 or starting 7-0.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much pushback. I think the fact that the Niners have lost so many people I think they have 7 either starters or rotational players that have picked up some form of injury. George Kittle was on an injured reserve, and Brock Purdy's going to be out for at least 3 weeks at this point, or at least that's what the initial report was. So those are obviously unfortunate. But Mac Jones came in and he didn't play a bad game. He definitely started out slow, and the Saints defense being on the field for so long, like with not a very confident offense, is unfortunate. But I get a win is a win in the NFL, and the 49ers came into the season with the easiest schedule relative to last season. So they have some easy games coming up. I don't know exactly what that schedule looks like, but they're on the up. And then obviously the Bills are the Bills. I never want to give them too much praise, but they genuinely look like one of the best teams in the NFL. And I had them winning the Super Bowl coming in this year. So Josh Allen is proven at least that part of the take, right?
Cautious optimism there with the Bills being your Super Bowl pick and not wanting to give them too much praise. I should have had the schedule pulled up. I do now. Dolphins, Saints, Pats, Falcons, Panthers. Then they get the Chiefs. Then they get the Dolphins again. So they're going to start off this season, I think, 7-0 if they can just take care of business. So they're going to go 7-0 going into the Chiefs. Let's go to your losers.
Yeah, so my losers are the Bears and the Vikings, 2 teams that played on Monday Night Football the week before. I think that for both these organizations, it looks like they might have a quarterback issue. Super unfortunate because of the fact that, at least for the Vikings, to start off with them, they came into last season not knowing what Sam Darnold was going to look like. And then he ends up getting them 14 wins, and they look like a very competent team, not as much in the playoffs, but still they had the option to pay him or to not. And then they shipped him off to Seattle. And now Seattle looks not half bad. And the Vikings, they definitely have some question marks. Obviously, J.J. McCarthy had that one great quarter, led the comeback, but he's had 7 bad quarters, and now he's injured. So what does that look like going forward? I've never been a big believer in J.J. McCarthy just in general. I came into the season not thinking he was going to be very good, and we'll see where we go from here. But I don't know. Like I've just never been super high on him, and he looked absolutely awful. Like it was on primetime too, so everybody got to watch it, but like he was just missing throws left and right. Justin Jefferson looked upset at points. Like there was a couple balls that looked like he just didn't have a very good day in general, and it took a couple sacks that were kind of funny, and it just in general didn't play very well. So I think the Vikings could have possible big issues there, especially because they're a team that's built to win now, and having to waste a year on a quarterback that you thought was the future and might not be, would be super unfortunate for them coming off a 14-win season. And then for the Bears, Caleb Williams, there really needs to be some evaluation on that, because the fact that the Lions came into this game kind of down in the dumps, their defense didn't even play that bad in week 1, but still, you think Ben Johnson, you think of all the highlight plays that the Lions had last year, and you think that might translate to the Bears, and it just flat out hasn't. Caleb Williams hasn't looked very good either. So you want to see more from him, and that was just an absolute like beat down. The Lions wanted to send a message in this game. Ben Johnson being their ex-offensive coordinator and now the Bears head coach, they ran up the score on them for good measure, but going for it on a 4th and goal that they just didn't need to. But still, like, that team their defense are more on offense than they are on defense, I think. And you really need to start evaluating whether Caleb Williams is the guy. And I think he gets through the end of this year and possibly into next year, but it looks like a long road ahead for Bears fans going forward.
Yeah, I was preaching Caleb Williams a little bit before the season. That definitely doesn't look good. Bit of a tough time. I know the Lions were coming into the game 0-1, but and they had that loss to the Packers, but I felt like they really felt like they wanted to win that game. A lot of negative media coverage around the Browns or around the Bears post game, excuse me, and it was just a slew of everything. It's coming down right now, but I think I still got faith in Caleb Williams. The JJ McCarthy stuff is really, really tough because, yeah, you're right. 7 bad quarters, 1 decent quarter. And now the Vikings in a win now mode are going to start Carson Wentz for the next few games or the foreseeable future in the big 2025. That's a rough spot to be in. Not where you want to go. Would have been nice to have Sam Darnold on the roster at this point. My losers are a little bit different. It's not teams, but it's veteran QBs. We talked a little bit about the Browns. You had them as the winner. I have Joe Flacco as the specific loser in that, where I don't think he's going to start very many more games for the Browns. And then vet QBs, Russell Wilson has a late career game renaissance against the Cowboys, and they still come out as losers. They're going to be, or they are 0-2. And I just don't really see him finishing out the season as the team starter. And I think that that's a win that you really would like to get to stay competitive and to keep your job if you're Russell Wilson. And it's not his fault, like, by any means, in any stretch of the imagination. And one really, really bad play towards the end, but he played well for the game. And I think that we're going to see Jackson Dart at some point before the midway part of the season. And then I have the future of the tush push being a loser, because I think that it was on full display how I'm not somebody who thinks that it should be eliminated because it's unfair or because not everybody can do it or because the Eagles do it at such a high rate. I think that it was on full display that this cannot be reffed properly, and I think that that's where it gets dangerous. It seems like it's not, as you would think, a player safety issue, but it seems like that players are kind of okay doing it from that perspective. So that is taken out. I think there's 2 reasons why a play would be or something would be eliminated: player safety, and then the other is it just cannot be reffed properly. The Eagles are jumping off sides, and then the other team is lined up in the neutral zone. And then there's a scrum, and if there's a fumble, they cannot rule on it properly, and they can't even see the line of scrimmage properly, and they being the refs, to make sure that this play is officiated the way that it should be or needs to be. I think that being on full display in a Super Bowl rematch will have a lot of people pointing to it in the NFL offseason, and I do think eventually this play will be outlawed. And I think it just comes down to the officiating. I think that kind of sucks. I think from a fan's perspective, you're not missing a ton because they're doing it on 2nd and 1. Everybody's doing it on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1. There's plenty of teams that have a lot of success with this. The Bills do. A lot of different QBs who are bigger have plenty of success. I mean, it's not something the Eagles just do. I just think it's a play that'll be eliminated eventually. I think I wish that defensive players could also push, but they do in those plays anyway too. So I think it's gone. I think it's going to be gone.
Yeah. I don't think that the vote was like relatively close this year, and I don't see a world in which they don't continue to vote on it, and at some point it gets banned from the NFL. Just because of the fact that it also, like, Roger Goodell is a big on like making the product, well, relatively. I mean, what they're doing with Red Zone doesn't make the product more watchable, but in certain terms, making the product more watchable, and that plays objectively, or yeah, objectively one of the worst plays to watch in the NFL. Like it is, you know what's coming, and like it just as an NFL fan, like I don't really care too much about the Chiefs or the Eagles from any particular perspective. Like it's just not fun. Like, and I think that that's part of like what the NFL is trying to market. Like they went from the no fun league, and they're trying to rebuild their image. And it's not one of those plays that anybody really enjoys watching unless you are an Eagles fan or a fan of the team that's running it. And it's becoming so consistent that even like on those like primary downs, like I've seen it ran on 2nd and 1 at this point, and that doesn't make that's not. I don't think that's really healthy for the game from a watchable perspective. So I definitely think that at some point, GMs are just gonna be like, when they vote on it, it's gonna go at some point. And it is unfortunate because it is literally just a play where it's like, we can do this better than you. Why does it have to go? But it's whatever at this point. I don't really care to see it stay or go. So, and then veteran QBs, definitely a rough week for them, especially Joe Flacco, particularly talking about the Browns. I mean, it's getting pretty close to time to hang it up for him. And then Russell Wilson, maybe leading into one of the winners or another loser that I have. But Russell Wilson had a phenomenal game, a really good bounce back game relative to how he played in week 1. And then still, like that game was one of the craziest games that I've watched. Genuinely just going back and forth. The Cowboys tying it up with like getting the ball back with 20 seconds left to go in that game. So a really fun game to watch, but probably not great for Russell Wilson's starting chances the rest of his career, probably.
So unfortunate too, because the late field goal tied up for the Cowboys. It's just, you can't control that at a certain point. But just one more thing on the tush push really quick before we get to the honorable mentions. It's really just not that the Eagles are the only ones doing it too. If we're just looking at it from like a product of the NFL perspective, a lot of other teams are also doing it. I think if you want to run a QB sneak that's not like where you don't have both of your running backs or a tight end pushing you, I think that's obviously fine. Brady did it for all those years. But just from a product perspective, yeah, it's kind of eliminated the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th and 1 like play calling and the stakes of that. It's automatic. And I think it really kind of also sucked that you do see a lot of defensive teams end up selling out in a specific way. I forget which team did it on the goal line last year against the Eagles, but where it was kind of going crazy. There was a ton of different penalties. But the Chiefs tried to give them a first down on 2nd and 1 to keep the game alive yesterday. And obviously the Eagles were going to decline it. It's not just specifically the Eagles. I do want to make that pretty clear. It's just, is it good for the game? Like as far as like the product, probably not. But if it's not reffed correctly, that's the biggest thing. If there's something wrong with the way that it's being reffed and the defense is at a clear disadvantage as far as they can't push their own players, then I think at a certain point you have to look at it, and I think they'll end up getting it out of the game, and it's fine. Like you said, if it stays or goes, it's not the end of the world either way.
Yeah, and then I mean, moving into at least my honorable mentions, I have like a lot of different losers from this week. I'll list them off and then maybe go into like some sort of depth about each of the teams. I have the Giants, Steelers, Jets, Bengals, and Chiefs, all in here for like probably separate reasons. The Giants, I think that the Russell Wilson, as much as we just talked about it, like possibly like being bad for Russell Wilson is like and his starting chances. I think that this win was enough for like I saw some Giants fans online being like, "This is the happiest I've been as a Giants fan in like 3 years. Like you never saw this competent of an offense." And I think that's like an overstatement because of how they performed literally the week before. But if the Giants, like if New York media isn't on Brian Dable about making the switch, I think that is actually worse for the Giants as a franchise because you want to see what you have in Jackson Dart. And the longer Russell Wilson stays as their quarterback, I think probably the worse for the Giants. I think probably the opposite of what I was talking about with the Browns. Or like maybe the exact same situation where you don't really want to see Russell Wilson do well because what does that get you like in the NFC? Like I think that they're the 3rd best team in this conference at the very best. And I don't know if at least with Russell Wilson as their quarterback. So getting to see your young quarterback, I think as a fan of a team is always exciting. You might want to see that for the Giants. The Steelers, Aaron Rodgers looks old. He is taking a lot of sacks that like a lot of younger quarterbacks could avoid. And he can make a lot of throws, but he can't make every throw anymore. And that Seahawks game, you wanted to see more out of him. He looks old and immobile. The Jets, Justin Fields had his like annual like not halfway decent. He had a good game in week 1, but he looked like in the 3 quarters he did play, he didn't look very good, and then he got injured. The Bengals, they lost on their quarterback again. Joe Burrow's injured, and it's partially because of the fact that, like people were saying online, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are making millions of dollars, and that offensive line is still in shambles, as well as the defense. And then the Chiefs starting 0-2 for the first time since 2014. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it just hasn't been a good start for them. And it's not just the fact that they're 0-2. They played good teams, but the way that they're 0-2, their offense hasn't looked good in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, if you've made it all the way to this part of the Clipped NFL winners and losers videos, make sure that you subscribe. The reason that the Bengals aren't one of our losers is because we have a specific video that we're going to be talking about them, and it's going to be later on in this full episode as well. But yeah, the Bengals season, again, defined by a Joe Burrow injury. Maybe they'll be able to stay afloat. Probably not. You had the extra winners too?
Yeah, I have the extra winners.
Yeah,
Lions, Ravens, Falcons. I think that the Falcons have a competent quarterback, and probably one of the better ones in that draft class. It is a stacked one. 6 quarterbacks in that draft class: Drake May, Jaden Daniels, all those good guys. Caleb Williams, maybe not in the lower echelon of that. JJ McCarthy also in there. But the Falcons look like they have one in Michael Penix. I think they made the right decision benching Kirk Cousins for him. Unfortunately, are still paying him $40 million to sit on the bench, but Penix looks good. And besides not being able to finish a couple of those drives, the run game also is much improved from that week 1 game against the Buccaneers. So they look really good, and I think that they're a playoff team. The Ravens, you never know how a team's going to come out after I feel like an emotionally draining loss. They're still way better than the Browns, but the fact that they just really put it on them and didn't really let the Bills game that they just let slip out of their grasp really affect them that much, I think is good for them as a Super Bowl contending team. And then the Lions, obviously there was a ton of talk, even from us in the sports media after week 1, about like maybe them missing their coordinators and Ben Johnson being part of the key of that offense, but their offense is still good. And I think that it was a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking where it was possibly an overreaction Monday that got to a lot of people. So the Lions still look good. They're definitely still a playoff team, and we'll see where they go from there. But I think that getting the monkey off their back a little bit is definitely good for them.
UCLA and Virginia Tech both fired their head coaches. So they didn't make it to Sunday. Their key cards did not work to get back into the facility. They're going to be potentially looking at a few different candidates. Just first thoughts on that. And then also those players got 30 days to transfer too. So those programs are cooked for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, if they weren't already, especially starting with UCLA, their losses have been particularly bad. And the fact that the transfers do have 30 days to just up and leave in the middle of the season is super unfortunate, because there's going to be a lot of people that decide to make that decision. Starting Utah's or UCLA schedule hasn't looked particularly insane starting the season. Utah was definitely the toughest one. They're now in the top 25, and they're just overall a good team. But 43-10 against Utah, and then followed that up by 30-23 against UNLV, who struggled in week 1 against an FCS school, and then got blown out by University of New Mexico with what was a 5-star quarterback. And we already discussed the Nico Iamaleava situation, but man, they had much higher expectations coming into the season with him transferring, and just in general, it's super unfortunate that their head coach is taking the brunt of this. But I mean, starting 0-3 and having a bleak rest of the season isn't looking too great. They also have Penn State in 2 weeks, and then they follow that up with a ranked Indiana at some point, in Ohio State on the road, and then they finish with a USC in the classic battle for LA at the end of the season. So they play 4 ranked teams at the end of the season. If he wasn't going to get fired at this point in the season, he was going to get fired at least some way in the middle of the season or towards the end of the season. So it was probably coming for them. And then Virginia Tech, man, they have looked absolutely awful. That Old Dominion game, it wasn't just the fact that they lost Old Dominion, they got dominated. If you watch that game, the Old Dominion was making one-handed grabs behind their head. It was also just an insane performance from an Old Dominion team where you kind of just look at them as a joke usually. But Virginia Tech, Kyron Drones hasn't looked very good, and in general, that team, it doesn't look very good. I think that their probably best performance was in week 1 against South Carolina, and then from there they just got absolutely destroyed by Vanderbilt, and then Old Dominion took it to them too. So unfortunate for these head coaches, but yeah, super early in the season for this to happen too. 0-3 is a bad start, but maybe not unovercomable, at least for a bowl game. But man, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I'll start with the UCLA one then. Yeah, it does suck that Deshaun Foster has to take the brunt of what happened with Nico, but it looks like if they're trying to pick stuff up, maybe that's where they end up going. Like you said, he was probably going to be out anyway. The way that this season was headed, it's going to be the reality that this is very, very pro sports esque, where we're going to try to save our season at this point. But now you lose all of those guys. They had a slew of guys decommit, and I would imagine that Nico might be gone. He's not going anywhere and getting more money, but maybe he wants to get out of this scenario. We talked about it just a few days ago about the situation whenever they lost their past game. And it looks like he's not just throwing away this season or chasing money I don't even think he ended up getting more money anyway. He's actively hurting his pro draft stock at this point. It is getting worst case scenario for him. And that is really bad. And this UCLA program is paying for it. Cautionary tale, all parties involved. And Joey Aguilar looks pretty good for Tennessee. They didn't pull out the win against Georgia, but he looks good. And Tennessee is probably going to bounce back after this week. But for Virginia Tech, yeah, Old Dominion, you can't have that game and then just expect to just go business as usual. Those other teams that they played on their schedule are both good, even though obviously South Carolina just took a loss. But yeah, they have, I think, more options as their next head coach is concerned. There's going to be Shane Beamer talks, obviously, with his connection to Virginia Tech. I don't think that that's very feasible right now, but he could have that pull. You're seeing Mike Vick, his name being out there. He's obviously the head coach at Norfolk State. I don't think that that's going to happen, but if you want to reinvigorate the program, that's definitely the biggest swing that you could take. I think that's very valid. Jamie Chadwell, Liberty had them playing very well a couple seasons ago. They're still a good program. Bob Chesney, coach at JMU, he'll probably get a ton of different offers if he wants to end up leaving after this year. That will maybe potentially be out of Virginia Tech's price range. And then Dan Mullen, UNLV, I don't think he leaves after 1 year, but maybe he chases Power 4 job, and that's where he ends up. I think there's some decent options. Those are probably the four best ones. But Virginia, I wrote an article on Virginia Tech before the season started, and I remember that their AD was practically begging their boosters for more money. They felt like they were at least, I forget the exact number, but hundreds of thousands of dollars behind the eight ball as far as the rest of the ACC teams were concerned. They, I think, ranked last in the funding for their athletics. They're in a bit of a more of a hole than I think a lot of other people believe. And it just comes down to, can they get a head coach for their football team that reignites the program? I think they're going to try to take a swing, but they're in a bad spot too. UCLA is in a worse spot, but Virginia Tech's not looking too good either. Let's go back to the NFL. The Chiefs are 0-2 for the first time since 2014. So I guess it begs to ask the question, is the dynasty over?
The dynasty is over. Everybody can rejoice, and the Chiefs have officially fallen from grace. And on a more realistic note, I think that the way they've started is completely unfortunate. If you are any type of fan of the Chiefs, I know that there aren't very many of them at this point, but like, they have not looked good in the first two games, just flat out. And it is more specifically on the offense than the defense. And the offense hasn't really looked good in probably like since 2023, if we're being honest. Like that, they went through their ups and downs all season, but the really interesting part about this season is that they're not pulling out the close games, or at least through the first two games they haven't. Like the key to last season, right? The key to having so many wins and like being on top of the AFC West for so long is the fact that they are able to play competitive games and win them. This season, like the Chargers game, and even to the extent of the Eagles game, like it's two games that you want to pull out, but they're not necessary. But still, like there does look like to be a fundamental issue with this offense. And if you look at the offense that they're dealing with, it kind of makes sense. Patrick Mahomes has led the team in passing and rushing both of the first two games. The rushing attack just hasn't been there. Isaiah Pacheco hasn't been the same since that injury last year. And then they're leaning on Kareem Hunt, who hasn't been in his prime for about 4 or 5 years now. And then their best receiver is probably Hollywood Brown at this point. Travis Kelce looks like a shell of himself, to be honest. He's probably the reason why they lost that Eagles game. They had goal to go, and then he drops him, or he drops a ball, but not only is it dropped, it is intercepted by the defense, and then only saved an offensive lineman how to save a pick six. Just in general, this team doesn't look very good from an offensive point of view. For the defense has always been stout, and I think that they play good enough games to like keep this offense in it. But man, when you're relying on Hollywood Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster as your wide receiver 1 and 2, it starts to look a little bit worse. And then obviously they have injuries and suspensions with Rashee Rice at this point. But I mean, they'll get it together, right? They're the Chiefs, but losing a division game to start, and then like kind of coming out at home and then coming out flat against the defending Super Bowl champions in the Super Bowl rematch, you just want to see a little bit more from them. And again, it's not really Patrick Mahomes' fault at this point. He can't do it all, leading in pass, obviously passing, but rushing in the last 2 weeks, and then having your like third best receiver, Tyquan Thornton, having to make incredible catches down the sideline isn't how you want to like start off the season. But we'll see. I think that it's not really cause for concern yet. If they start losing any more games than this, it could start to be. But I think that when Rashee Rice comes back and that offense starts to get a little bit more clicking a little bit more, it'll be business as usual for the Chiefs. But it hasn't looked great over the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think you hit everything, and I agree with all of the points that you said. It's still not over. It does suck for the Chiefs, though. Their MO last year was winning these close games, and they've dropped a couple of them now. The Chargers and Eagles deserve plenty of credit because the Eagles are a Super Bowl contending team, and the Chargers are at the very least a playoff team in the AFC. So 2 tough games, close games. They're just not able to finish, and their offense hasn't looked good, as you said, since 2023. And that is a serious thing now, especially 2 games into this year. It hasn't changed. Dealing with some injuries, and that run game just isn't there. Travis Kelce, not good right now. And then Hollywood Brown being your best receiver, probably going to need a little bit more help. Even with Patrick Mahomes there, he can only do so much. Looking ahead at their schedule, they, for the most part, have a good team and then a bad team the rest of the way, which I think is really, really funny. And just it doesn't really allow them a chance to really go on a streak, but maybe they'll be able to take care of some of those better teams on the schedule. They got the Giants, Ravens, then Jags, then Lions, Raiders, Commanders, Bills, Broncos, Colts. So I don't really know where we're ending right there, but I still think that this team is going to be a playoff team. They're still going to win some close games. They're going to be a good team, tough out week to week, no matter what. They're not going to just roll over, but they definitely have some work to do. I don't know if anybody's really making this comparison, but I know that it could potentially come up, and I don't really see it, but I felt like it was worth mentioning. When everybody looks back at the Patriots dynasty, they always go 05 to 2014, right? Because they won that Eagles, the Super Bowl against the Eagles in 05, and then they had 9 years in between the next one, and they were kind of maybe seen as a retool era. They didn't have a lot of holdovers from that time. I think it was just Vince Wilfork and Tom Brady. During that time, of course, they were 18-1 in 2007, and Tom Brady lost the season because he got injured, and they also made it to the Super Bowl against the Giants. So they were pretty dominant even still through that run, and you could book 12-4 every single year, and they just ran into the Ravens a couple times. I don't see it, but I could see some people talking about maybe this is where they enter their retooling era of the Chiefs dynasty, if you will, if this does continue. I think they do enter a retool, but I don't think they'll be able to, if they do, be able to be as good as the Patriots were for all of those years. That's an insane task, but I don't know if anybody's made that comparison, but I feel like it's pretty easy, and I don't think it exactly fits them. All right. Joe Burrow, toe injury. Got to get a new name for the turf toe injury too, by the way, because he's out for 2 to 3 months, and a ton of players always say how tough that injury is. Requires surgery. Another year, another Bengals injury. Jake Browning is the starting quarterback now for them. Have they lost this season? Has it slipped away again?
I don't see how it could not have slipped away from them. I don't think this Jaguars team is any indication of how they're going to play in the future. I don't have any particular belief in this Jaguars team. So that's like saying one thing. But also Jake Browning, we'll see what we get from him. He has probably the best receiving core in the NFL, so that is definitely a positive. But the whole thing about the Bengals is the fact that their defense is absolutely awful, and that doesn't like get any better because with Joe Burrow going out, obviously Joe Burrow isn't a defensive player, but the fact that Joe Burrow isn't going to be having any long drives or leading a competent offense down the field definitely hurts the defense, because the longer the defense is on the field, the more opportunities an opposing team has to score on them. So the fact that their defense will probably be comparable to last year's, and as bad as it was last year, is unfortunate for the Bengals. And now, again, like you mentioned, the open, Jake Browning is throwing the ball, and he looked. I don't even know how you want to say he looked. I don't really have a word for it, because although he did throw 3 interceptions, he was good enough to lead a game-winning drive. So there's good and bad with it. He's not a starting quarterback in the NFL. This might be a genuine situation where we have to go out and like trade for somebody. I don't really know what that looks like at this point, but 2 to 3 months essentially is a good enough portion of the season to wreck the season. So I don't think Jake Browning can keep them afloat for that long. And if they don't get anybody else, I think that this is a Bengals team that stares down the barrel of another season where another like wasted season of Joe Burrow's prime, essentially, because obviously this is an injury at this point. But that is another season docked off, and they're playing in a division that has the Steelers, who are consistently at least decent, the Browns, who are going to be looking to retool, but like at the very least, the Ravens, who are going to be good for years on end. And every year that you get is an opportunity, and this year it looks like it's going to be a wasted one, unfortunately.
Yeah, the Jake Browning threw 3 interceptions in this game, and he did lead a game-winning drive, but watching that drive was like very painful. And they were able to still do it. Doesn't matter how it gets done, and that's a good win over a Jaguars team, and they're 2-0. So there's a bit of a cushion. You've got at least a couple weeks here now where you could potentially take a loss, and next week you're going to play Carson Wentz and the Minnesota Vikings. So there is something to be said. Maybe if they are 3-0, I'm just trying to make the case potentially why they don't end up losing this season again. Joe Burrow is the only player that can make that team work right now with the offensive line and the defense and being able to get the ball to those great receivers. It's not going to be Jake Browning as the season goes on. If they're 500 by the time Joe Burrow comes back, they'll be able to make the playoffs, I think. I would like to think. But will they be 500 by the time he rolls back around and win earliest sometime in late November or like early December? My initial gut says that that's probably going to be too late for them, and really unfortunate. And more people are going to start having conversations about Joe Burrow and his standing as far as some of the better quarterbacks in the league, because you just can't ignore how many times he's been injured. And I don't think that a lot of Bengals fans, because Jamar Chase has been so good, would have gone back and taken Penei Sewell. It's just it's a revisionist history. Although I will say I was saying that they should have taken him, but uh, still it's tough because it still has worked out, and it's been just about as good as you can have as far as a wide receiver quarterback duo. But man, are we gonna look back on this and say, wouldn't it have been nice if Joe Burrow had an offensive line? Is this how it ends? I don't know. I'm not saying it's over, like, for the rest of his career, but man, another year of this. I feel like it's devastating. I'm not a Bengals fan, but I got to feel for a lot of Bengals fans because this just feels terrible.
Yeah, no, you definitely have to feel for Bengals fans, because it's like they were so uncompetitive for so many years. Obviously, there was a bridge between Andy Dalton and Joe Burrow that was kind of no man's land, and they weren't very good. And then towards the and even with Andy Dalton, I mean, they made a couple playoffs, and then they won a couple playoff games, that most memorably against the Steelers. But like like it's just the Bengals have never been one of those franchises that you can count on to like be consistently good. And now they have the guy, they have the quarterback that should be able to lead them there, and then they can't figure it out organizationally with the defense, and then now Joe Burrow's hurt. So it's like, when do you get a win as a Bengals fan, and when can you just start looking forward to a season and being like, man, like this is the season where we're really going to do it? It doesn't look like it's going to be this season, and to be fair, it probably was never going to be the season with how that defense looks and just everything going on around that football team. But at the very least, you would have had like a fun team. Like Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase Brown in the backfield is good enough to want to make Sundays enjoyable for you. And I don't know if Jake Browning has that same luster around him.
I don't think he does. I'm sorry, Jake Browning, Washington Huskies legend. Also, this isn't just to like dog on the offensive line. Injuries and these hits and sacks are just a part of football. It is what it is. Just bad luck, I guess. Maybe he's injury prone. I don't know. It is what it is. Hits add up, but that's just been the case for him in his NFL career, unfortunately, post Super Bowl run. And I think he also got injured his first year starting as well. But Arch Manning, booed at halftime. Another poor performance through the air for him. And Texas now needs to pick it up because SEC play is just around the corner. This is now turning into Arch Manning, not Heisman, obviously, but concern as far as the rest of this season goes, because it only gets tougher from here on out. They have Sam Houston this week, so they get one extra tune-up before things start getting real. What are we thinking here, man?
Yeah, I mean, this Texas defense has been real for years
Yeah.
now, and I think that they might have like used that as a more of a reliance than like was like previously thought. I like want to harp on like who Arch Manning's throwing to first before I really get into like my thoughts on Arch Manning. I will say like relative to like other SEC schools and just other schools in general, like you see like good like receiving cores at Miami and stuff like that. I think they like Texas might have just like put too much on like Arch Manning's name and not enough investment into this wide receiving core. Because I mean Ryan Wingo is a good receiver, but like not a great receiver. And then you lose Matthew Golden and like just guys from last year, and then Christian Clark is your second leading receiver at this point. Like that receiving core isn't very good. So it's not like he's throwing the ball to like guys that are getting consistently open, but at some point, like you have to evaluate him as a quarterback and like acknowledge the fact that he is missing some throws, especially in that first game. And then maybe not just especially in that first game, he didn't have he was less than 50% completion percentage against UTEP this past week, had a 26.5 QBR out of a scale of 100, and just in general looked like absolutely terrible. Got booed at halftime, as you mentioned, and it's more of a situation of like, can Texas turn things around? Obviously, they're 2-1, so not the worst thing in the world. But the 2 wins have come against teams that they should be blowing out, and that game against UTEP was relatively competitive for way too long. And it wasn't because the defense never really gave UTEP a chance, but still, like this question is about Arch Manning for specific reasons, and he has the 88th best QBR in all of college football, so not exactly where you want to see him as potential Heisman favorite coming into the season, and in general just hasn't looked like a good quarterback in general, not even like relative to his name, but just as a cool, like if you blindfold anybody and give them the stats that he's had this season, you would say that that's not a good quarterback and probably not anywhere close to being drafted as a first round pick, much less first overall. So I mean, do I think that he has the talent to turn the season around? Or not just the season, but like his possible draft stock round, sure. But you want to see more than what he's been giving you, especially in these what have been tune-up games, because San Jose State and UTEP are teams that you want to be beating by 30 plus points. They did against San Jose State, but you want to see more convincing wins than that. And then they play in the SEC now, so it's not like you're getting Big 12 competition. You have Florida in your first game event, SEC at the Swamp, and then you play a ranked Oklahoma team. You play Vandy down the line. You play Georgia. You end the season with Texas A&M at home, but still a Texas A&M team that looks really good and has 2 really competent receivers on the other end of that field. So you really want to see Arch Manning start to turn up at the very least against Sam Houston State this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, and Florida's playing hard. Like for Billy Napier, like if Lagway doesn't throw 5 picks, who knows how that LSU game would have been. Nussmeier had a really, really bad late pick in that game. They only lost by 10. I mean, shoot, that's like a moral victory at a certain point, right? We haven't talked about LSU Florida, so I wanted to get that in here. But yeah, Arch Manning, the expectations seem to have completely changed now, because this isn't just, I mean, they were at the highest of high. We were giving him a gold jacket before he was, starting week 1 for Texas, but now it's, can he be confident enough for this Texas team to make a run at the college football playoff? Because you're right, this Texas defense is elite. they're great. They were great against Ohio State, and they're keeping these games from turning into something that you would put in your top 10 upset list or whatever for the season. Like they're keeping it from that because the quarterback play just isn't there. And he had 2 rushing touchdowns in the first half against UTEP, but the through the air stuff is getting really bad. We talked about it after the Ohio State game and a little bit too, I believe, after San Jose State. And there was speculation that he was injured, and everybody was coming out saying he's not. He's healthy. If he has to get shoulder surgery or something by the end of the year, that would explain a lot. But right now, if they're telling us that he's healthy, I see that. I see him wincing when he's throwing. I'm still going to have to grade by what they're telling us. And if he's healthy, this is really, really bad. The people were comparing him to Ryan Leaf, which I thought was hilarious. But he also responded, and I wanted to mention this too because there's a little bit of perspective here. So Ryan Leaf led the nation in passing, first team All-American, Sammy Baugh QB of the year, finished third in the Heisman, and played for a Natty in his final season. He had a pretty good season that year. So I think we also do need to recognize too his perspective in history, where if he doesn't live up to his name, that's fine. But we shouldn't also throw insults that aren't actually insults at him too. I think he could pick it up. He's got one more tune-up. It is what it is. I'm going to probably die on this hill for Arch Manning, I think, at a certain point. But if he's injured, come out and say that.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, relative to like what the expectations were, like obviously they were rocket high and whatever, but man, like if nothing has been like if there hasn't been an injury, did he not look right last year too? Like at the opportunities he did get to play, I know that like he was kind of thrust into that Georgia game at some point as like supposed to be like the hero who kind of like takes over, but like like at the very end of that game, and he played in a couple of different games last year, but I don't know, like I've just like through what he showed us in college, like he played against the University of Louisiana Monroe last year and also had a sub or close to 50% completion percentage. Like there have been some games that he's been featured in for Quinn Ewers last year where he didn't look particularly great either. Like it was like he was thrown into like a bad situation. He was like not expecting to be starting, all that good stuff. But I don't like. It is unfortunate that through like 4 or 5 plus games that he started in his career now, he just hasn't looked like the guy that you thought you were, the 5-star Manning quarterback that you thought you were going to get out of high school. And you just want to see more because he is the Manning and he does have that last name. But I don't think it's particularly over for him. And I think that as bad as he's looked through the first couple of games, there is a world where he ends up playing great during SEC play, and everyone forgets about these first couple weeks.
That's always a possibility. And I said that after the Ohio State game. I was like, we could potentially forget about it. It's getting a little bit tougher. And then will he make us forget? Will he be able to rise to the occasion? Now it's starting to look a little bit less likely. I really hope he's off social media too. Just wanted to say that before we get out of here. I really hope he's not looking at what's going on because he's getting the brunt of it. And, maybe rightfully so in a sense of just the sports fan stuff. But hopefully he's not paying attention to that. We covered as much as we could from this football weekend. There was a ton of different stuff. We didn't even talk too much about the specific game of Georgia Tech Clemson, but mention that. And then I got my mention here of Florida LSU. Any final words before we get out of here?
Not really.
Underrated part of the week at all? Anything that you enjoyed?
Oh, underrated part of the week. Back-to-back kick returns from the Dolphins-Patriots game. I thought that was like that's the first time I've ever seen that in my life. And I had red zone on a split screen with the Dolphins game. And during the Dolphins part of that game, getting that like 70-yard kick return after the punter essentially outkicked his coverage, and then that being returned immediately by a 100-yard kick return from the Patriots was sad to watch, but also just a fun part of the weekend, I guess, especially that first part and less so the second part. So that was maybe an underrated part of the week. I felt like that kind of got brushed over a little bit.
That did kind of get brushed over a little bit too. Yeah, I feel like I've only ever seen that happen in like Madden or whatever. Yeah, seeing that happen actually in real time was really cool. Rayleigh Brown, hopefully I'm saying it right, either of those pronunciations. Former 5-star recruit, first went to USC. They tried to turn him into a wide receiver. He then transferred to Arizona State last year, sat behind Cam Scatterbo, and sidelined most of the year due to an injury. He rushed for over 100 yards in back-to-back games. I thought that was really cool. Saw that on the timeline. There was a ton of different stuff that always happens in college football people don't talk about. thought that was a really cool story. Figured I'd mention it. But I think we covered everything. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been the Big Little Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig, and we'll see you guys later in this week.